As a women's health professional, you get it. You already know the value of menstrual cycle tracking. But I'm guessing that you're not entirely comfortable interpreting complex charts, weird mucus patterns, abnormal bleeding, or other similar and unusual situations. You're passionate about fertility awareness and you want to use it in your practice, but you're not sure where to start. And this is where FAMM comes in. Registration is now open for our Fertility Awareness Mastery Mentorship Program. The next class starts in a few short weeks. We're starting on the 26th of March, 2025. By the time you finish your FAMM certification, you'll have the skills to confidently teach fertility awareness to your clients, interpret all kinds of complex charting scenarios, and you'll have the step-by-step protocols you need to help your clients improve their hormone and menstrual cycle health. Registration is only open for a short time, so apply today at fertilityfriday.com/FAMMlive. That's fertilityfriday.com/FAMMLIVE. Transform your practice in 9 months. Join us in FAMM. Again, that's fertilityfriday.com/FAMMLIVE. This is the Fertility Friday podcast, episode number 566. Today, I'm sharing another brand new episode in our FAMM Practitioner series. So today, I'm sharing an episode with one of our practitioners, Grace Parce. And it's such an interesting conversation that we have. She shares a little bit about her history of losing her period for a period of 3 years. And she shares how she went from that place all the way to now having a strong, robust cycle with a healthy luteal phase. It obviously didn't happen overnight. You know, in our conversation, she talks about how many years that it took her to get to this point. And we also got into a really interesting discussion of the dance world. So Grace was part of the dance world. She was a dancer. And I can relate to that as well because I did ballet dancing for most of my young life when I was a little girl. I loved it. And although it's a wonderful, fun, enjoyable experience, I mean, there are some challenges, as many of us know, because there is a higher percentage of girls in some of those artistic, especially those kind of dance world scenarios, who feel the pressure to have a certain body type and limit their food consumption. And the research shows that they have higher rates of menstrual cycle disruptions and often put on the pill to, quote, regulate that kind of thing. So we do talk about some of those things. Like I said, very interesting episode. So before we jump in today, I want to tell you a little bit about Grace. Grace Parce is a certified integrative nutritionist and fertility awareness educator dedicated to helping women find real solutions to health issues often dismissed or normalized. Through her business, OvaFreak, she empowers women to gain body literacy, address hormonal imbalances, and take control of their fertility and health. Her passion stems from personal struggles with amenorrhea, hormonal birth control, and PMDD, which inspired her to seek solutions beyond conventional approaches. Grace trained in nutrition through the Institute of Integrative Nutrition and Fertility Awareness Methods through the FEMM Institute, and of course now FAMM. And she now helps women view the menstrual cycle as a vital sign and use their biomarkers to improve overall health. So without further ado, let's go ahead and jump into today's interview with Grace. And I'm excited to be here today with you, Grace. Welcome to the show.
Yeah, I'm so honored to be here. Thank you for having me.
Well, I mean, I absolutely love these episodes, and they selfishly give me an opportunity to have some additional time with you. Mm-hmm. And also, I find that when I do this type of format, an interview format, it's very different to how you just talk to people. Because when you do an interview format and you ask these kind of open-ended questions, I find that I just get to learn so much more about your story. And I found that with every single time I've done these. So really excited to have you and to dive into your experience. So let's go ahead and start with my favorite question, which is, how old were you when you had your first period? And take us through a little bit of your reproductive, history. So if birth control was part of that, and essentially what led you to jumping into fertility awareness within the FAMM program at this stage of your professional career.
So I would say this is a very meandering story. So stop me if I go too long with this, but I got my period the day before my 14th birthday. And I'll remember that because it was the day before my 14th birthday. And most of my friends at that point, I feel like had already had their period. So I was relatively, I was anticipating it to some degree, but I also grew up in a house with three brothers. And so it wasn't necessarily like a thing that we talked about a lot because it was definitely more of a boy house. But I was a dancer growing up. And so my first couple of years of menarche were very, I didn't have a lot of knowledge of my body or kind of, I didn't expect a period. I honestly have no idea how often I got my period. I was pretty muscular and lean. I danced every day, probably from the time I was 12 to 18. By the time I was about 17, I was pretty far down that path of pursuing dance as a profession. I was dancing kind of part-time-ish with Carolina Ballet, kind of as like a student apprentice, I would say. And I was planning on taking auditions, but I was also applying to colleges, auditions for ballet companies. And I kind of got this idea in my head. And up until that point, I had never had any body image issues or, negative thoughts about my body. I think I always felt it was very functional, and that's all I really thought about it. But I got this idea in my head that I was going to, lose 5 pounds because I thought that it would improve my standings or like make me look more appealing in the ballet world. And unfortunately, that was a very slippery slope, especially as a 17-year-old that knew nothing about nutrition. That the ballet world 15 years ago, I think oh my gosh, more than 15 years ago, was really different than it is now. Even I think it's much more body accepting and there's much more talk about body image issues in ballet. And so anyway, there was a spiral and kind of a full-fledged eating disorder that arose out of that. Eventually, it became enough of an issue where I decided to leave the ballet world. I was going to go to college for dance and for music, which most people ask me, like, how can you do both things? And I think I've always been lucky enough to be someone that really enjoys and invests in the things that I'm passionate about. And that is a blessing and a curse, I would say, because I got to a point with both of those things where I felt like I had sustained it at a high level for so long. You really can't do that in your professional life. That was a weird period of time because when I was in like an outpatient eating disorder facility at Duke Hospital. And it was my first introduction into kind of nutrition as a subject matter. I don't know. But they were very adamant that like you eat everything and you don't obviously have any restrictions. And there was a lot of kind of like literal force feeding, but everybody watched you and like made sure that you were eating and all that. And I felt terrible. Like once I went to college, there was kind of this condition of, okay, you're going to stop dancing. You're going to just pursue your degree in music and you'll like do these check-ins, this whole contract with my doctors and my parents at the time must have been miserable. Yeah. So what ended up happening was I always kind of felt like a victim of my own body, I think. Like my body was working against me. And I had this cello teacher that was very much, he said this thing to me often. It was like, you just need to feed your donkey. And he kind of became like a support and an advocate for me during that time. But it became this very kind of transactional approach to eating and like caring for my body and not like this holistic like acceptance and love and appreciation for the things that the female body can do. Yeah, I think as a young adult in my like early teens, basically until I was about 23, I went the more Western medical approach. And especially when I was still really thin, I wasn't having a period at that point. And I probably didn't have a period for a good, 3 years. And then I had a doctor recommend that I go on birth control as a way to get my period back and regulate my hormones, as I'm sure you've heard people say many times. So I tried that, and I think I was a sophomore in college, and I gained probably 25 pounds in a year. And I'm sure at that time I like wasn't producing enough hormones naturally, but yeah, it was pretty psychologically difficult for me coming from where I had come from, of just like having this definitely some body image stuff growing up. But ultimately, I went off of it, I want to say 2 times, where I would try something and I decide, oh no, this isn't working, and try a different pill. Oh, this makes me feel terrible. And then the last attempt was I had a doctor recommend the depot shot. Stopped getting my period immediately on that. And I think I did it twice and just decided, like, you do it for every 3 months, and just cold turkey. I was like, I'm not going back. We're not doing this anymore. So aside from the weight gain, I would say, I don't know if mental health issues run in my family, but I have always been like prone to the more depressive tendencies, and just personality wise, I know that I can be very emotional, and I have really high highs and really low lows. Let's just say that. When I was probably about 23, at that point, I had been off birth control for probably a year, but I had become like really inflamed and my skin was breaking out. And I had gotten out of a pretty long relationship. And so, of course, my mom became my like sole, you know, confidant. But she was just getting fed up with me because I was always kind of depressed and annoyed with my skin and all those things. And she was like, Grace, you just need to go on birth control, or, I don't want to hear about this anymore. Like this, do figure it out. And she was very loving. My mom's great, but she was kind of at her wit's end with it. And so I did for 1 month, and then it just got so much worse. And I was like, this is not, there has to be another way. And that's when I found fertility awareness. It was a very slow process for me, and it has made me see how what we do with the FAMM mentorship program, it's just so needed and important. Because I told you this the other day, I spent 10 years trying to fix, it was probably more like 8 years, but a very long time trying to fix all my period problems. So at that point, and this was kind of like the other pinnacle, was I had a doctor say that he thought that I was bipolar. I was really uncomfortable with that idea and going on any type of medication for it. So I started tracking everything, and like the very type A human that I am would like document, okay, I'm feeling this way on this day and all that. And lo and behold, I found out it was cyclical. And so I sought out another doctor who kind of affirmed that like that was a thing and said, yeah, it's called PMDD. It is possible that that's what you have. And I went down that rabbit hole of trying to fix it without antidepressants or birth control. Yeah, it was a long journey. It took me about 8 years to really get to a place where my cycles were in the normal parameters. And also I didn't have these terrible mood symptoms popping up for 2 weeks every month. So yeah, that's kind of the story.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you so much for sharing that.
Yeah.
I mean, every time I ask that question, we get a good insight into those early years, those early adult years. And
Mm-hmm.
you had just a variety of experiences. I mean, some of the things that stood out to me, of course, you said that you felt like you were a victim in your own body.
Yeah.
And you also said, like many other women have experienced, when you would go to the medical establishment to seek help from this, you mentioned that you didn't have a period for 3 years. And I know we've talked about this in class, very, very common. I
Right.
was a ballet dancer as well for a period of time. And I would be curious to know how it's changed, because that was a very long time ago for me,
Yeah.
probably 20 plus years since
I
I was a
think
little
social
girl.
media really changed it. Yeah. I think with social media, there's just so much more awareness about these things, which
Yeah,
is probably good. So,
true. But at the end of the day, so that's something interesting. I'll have to kind of see if I can find some new information. But you're still in a leotard. I know when I was young,
yeah.
you're seeing everyone else's body, and the girls. Maybe this is different now, but the girls who would be, and I was doing more of like a classical style. I know now when I was younger, I think many years ago, there was always kind of this background idea that maybe you would, especially I grew up in a small town, like maybe you would go to like the conservatory of ballet,
Yeah.
whatever school, and make it big. And so there was always, and my teachers then were also of a different generation when that was what
Yes.
you did, right? So those
Mhm.
teachers were, my teacher was incredible from that ballet standpoint. And
Yeah.
she was very classically trained. She was brilliant, and her movements were perfect. And so from that perspective, you're kind of, it's not like these days, plenty of girls go to dance class just to have
Yeah.
fun. Like that's the goal.
Right.
Like the goal is to have
Right.
fun. But when I was young, the goal was not that anyone ever said that was the goal, but from the perspective of that, just from my personal experience. So I'm not talking about anybody else. I'm just talking about me in my little small town in my little ballet class. That there was kind of like this understated goal that, if you really made it, like you could go up to the conservatory and like you could end up
Yeah.
doing big things. And that leaves a certain level of perfection
Yeah.
that's required. And you all know, no one ever said like, you're too fat. Like no one ever said that.
Right.
But teachers would say things. I've said this probably before on the podcast because I am a Black woman and I do have a curvy body.
Yes.
And from the dance world, it means I have a big butt. And so my teacher never said, you have a big butt. She said, you have a curved spine.
Interesting.
And I knew that that's what she meant.
Yeah.
And all
I
the other girls who were getting all the parts had very skinny bodies.
I remember kind of at the peak of my weight loss, there was a very small group of students that were kind of in this like really high level class. And they were a lot of people that went to dance for these huge companies like New York City Ballet. Like there's many people in there that did that. I remember one time one of our coaches saying, nobody else in this room needs to lose any more weight except, and he said the name of a student who happened to not speak English very well. Yeah, just stuff like that. And it was because people had seen, oh, well, this person lost weight and like they're doing really well and they went to SAB. And so like, I need to do the same thing. And
wow.
Yeah, it wasn't like talked about as this toxic thing that existed, but there were so many things that happened where it's like, of course, kids see things happen and they're going to react. They see, oh, I definitely grew up in a family where it was like, yeah, you want to be good at things. Like you want to like do your best and like try to get to the top. And like my parents didn't kind of perpetuate that intentionally, but it was definitely, it was a vibe. So yeah, of course I saw, oh, this person's doing this and they're being successful. And so maybe if I lost some weight and then the whole spiral, that definitely wasn't intentional.
Yeah.
Once you start going down, you start going down. So yeah.
Well, and as I've read more research in the area of HA and women in sport and all of those different areas, I've quietly, maybe not so quietly, but I feel like I've quietly come to this kind of like what you said. You said it wasn't really talked about.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know how they talk about it now, but if I were to run the world and determine how these things are talked about in sport,
if only.
one of the recommendations I would want to tackle it head on,
Oh yeah. Like let's talk about nutrition.
With the research background to say that literally the sports that have an emphasis on the aesthetic skinniness, like you can't even pretend like ballet doesn't have an emphasis on the aesthetic, similar to gymnastics and figure skating. You can't even pretend that if you go to a ballet or if you go to, I haven't, but the arts, I can't think of a gymnastics, maybe cirque, right? If you go to
rhythmic gymnastics or something,
or gymnastics or something, or if you literally watch figure skating, they all have a certain aesthetic.
Yeah.
So there should be some sort of acknowledgement that this is, the research has found that women and girls who participate in those sports have a much higher rate of menstrual cycle disruption.
Absolutely.
Losing their menstrual cycle potentially altogether, and also even using the pill specifically. They're put on the pill specifically to, quote, like you said, regulate,
fix it,
your cycle, get your period back, that kind of thing. And so, and educating parents on nutrition, because the one thing about ballet, I don't know what your experience was, and I would imagine figure skating and gymnastics are like the same kind of thing that I'm about to say, which is it was very athletic. For someone who didn't actually participate in that sport, you might think that it's just a bunch of girls dancing around tutus, but there was significant it was a significant activity. Like it was certainly, there was a lot of physical athleticism that went into the sport. And being that most parents aren't educated about nutrition unless they're doing that as a profession, if that was the one recommendation I could make for these sports, it would be that. Because if you don't tackle it head on, it's not good enough to just be like, oh, no one needs to lose more weight. Like the parents have to be
You
educated.
can't do it retroactively.
Feeding the girls.
Yes.
Yeah. So,
Yeah. It is funny because I think, my mom definitely grew up in a generation where like thinness was also the ideal. Like I do think that probably also contributed, and she is not to blame at all, but I do think that she'll probably listen to this, and I don't want her to feel bad about that. Love you, Mom. I don't want her to feel bad about that, but definitely, yeah, there was just kind of this attitude around body weight for sure. And when I think back to the beginning of the treatment where there was almost like this, you have to eat this, you have to eat that, the things that I was given to eat, it wasn't good for you food. It was, like drink and sure because we don't believe that you'll eat enough calories in a day. And like, I'm going to watch you drink this because I know that at least you'll be getting something. But prior to all of that, the amount of food that I consumed is almost funny. Like I would go to my friends' houses when I was in probably freshman year, sophomore year, before all this started. And I would just like raid their snack cabinets because also we had 4 kids in our house. So there was never enough food. Yeah. My friends probably were just like, why are you so hungry? But I was dancing for like 3-4 hours a day at least. And so I would eat probably terrible for you food, but I would eat so much of it. But also at that point, the only unit of measure that I knew anything about was calories, because calories were such a huge focus in like the 90s and early 2000s. Now I know so much more about all of this, and I just have a different, you can't do it retroactively. Like, I think it's, when I have kids, I'm going to talk about it like from the get-go. Not, you should only eat that, not to create food fear for sure, but just so that they know, like, what is healthy eating? What does your body require? Like your menstrual cycle is a vital sign. And if something's going wrong, then like, it's probably related to the food that you're eating. So, yeah.
As a women's health professional, you get it. You already know the value of menstrual cycle tracking. But I'm guessing that you're not entirely comfortable interpreting complex charts, weird mucus patterns, abnormal bleeding, or other similar and unusual situations. You're passionate about fertility awareness and you want to use it in your practice, but you're not sure where to start. And this is where FAMM comes in. Registration is now open for our Fertility Awareness Mastery Mentorship Program. The next class starts in a few short weeks. We're starting on the 26th of March, 2025. By the time you finish your FAMM certification, you'll have the skills to confidently teach fertility awareness to your clients, interpret all kinds of complex charting scenarios, and you'll have the step-by-step protocols you need to help your clients improve their hormone and menstrual cycle health. Registration is only open for a short time, so apply today at fertilityfriday.com/FAMMlive. That's fertilityfriday.com/FAMMLIVE. Transform your practice in 9 months. Join us in FAMM. Again, that's fertilityfriday.com/FAMMLIVE. Now let's go ahead and jump back into today's episode. There's so much there. I mean, it's such a big topic. And then of course, when you dive into parenthood, I think, I don't know, I'm trying to think because I'm thinking like, do we have specific conversations about nutrition? But we do.
I am curious.
My kids do know about, you can't write a book about all the nutritional stuff about the kids knowing something, but I think it's the way that we talk about it. So I kind of like smash this food pyramid, right? Talk about macronutrients and I talk about that nutritional aspect of it. So it's kind of like, you want to become big and strong like your daddy kind of thing. Like a big jokester, right? But it's like, but you kind of have to find ways that make sense for the age of your children. But to be honest with you, my 2 cents on this, and again, grain of salt, is that it's what you do.
Not what
you do. Yeah. So by feeding your children nutritious meals like 3 times a day, and
they'll figure it out.
And you eating and you modeling like you eating food.
Right.
And
Absolutely. I feel like I've heard so many people say that recently. Like your kids aren't going to listen to anything that you say, but
yeah,
they'll
it's
see exactly
astounding.
what you do.
Yeah, they're
Yes.
just like little repeater bots,
Yeah.
copy bots.
Yeah. Copy bots. I like
Yeah.
that. Yeah.
So, I mean, no one is perfect, but I feel like it is really useful to educate yourself in that realm of
Hmm.
nutrition. So, I mean, back to your story, you mentioned, I just want to touch on that one point again, that you didn't
Sure.
have a period for 3 years. And then, of
Hmm.
course, you went to the doctor. And of course, their response was, to get on the pill. And in the doctor's defense, when you go into the research, I think that's how they're trained. They're trained
Yeah.
that this is the solution. And there is a bit of a debate in the research literature about, because obviously, for anyone who's not that familiar with AHA, and I know, Lily and I went into this a ton in Real for Fertility, talked about this in the Fifth Vital Sign, but, if you lose your period for 3 years, it does have an effect on your bone development, especially because this is happening when you're young. And as women, we don't get our full kind of maximum bone density until we're, late into our late 20s.
Yeah.
And so the debate is that there is some research literature that would suggest that, the pill might, stop the bone problem, but it
Okay.
doesn't. It
Yeah.
doesn't. So,
Yeah.
there's studies that show where the bone loss can happen. I remember this one study that I talked about in the Fifth Vital Sign, and they examined specific areas of the body and they looked at the bone density. And they found that although the pill slowed the loss, like the loss of bone density in, one area of the body, it didn't really touch these other areas. And so at best, it's mixed but not great. This
Yeah.
potential for it even helping. And it's crazy to me. And I'm sure crazy to you as well, now that you're in the myths, deep into the FAMM, rabbit holes here. We're
Yeah.
very deep into those, that anyone would even that would even be the first
Yes.
suggestion.
Yes. I do wonder because I definitely grew into college. Like I probably didn't stop growing until I was 22. And I think that that's kind of abnormal for women. Like most people are kind of, okay, I'm 17, I'm probably full grown. But I grew a good like inch and a half, and like the shape of my hips changed pretty drastically when I was on birth control. And I do wonder now, I'm like, was that like how I would have developed had I not gone on birth control? Like, I don't know. Maybe, I don't know. But I,
Yeah.
yeah, the birth control thing is always interesting. I have friends now that are very much still on birth control, but they know that I'm kind of in this more on FAMM side of things. And I always say like, there's a time and a place. I definitely prefer FAMM. So
Mhm. Well,
yeah.
so you're at a stage where obviously you've made a shift in your career, and that was one of the things that brought you to
Yes.
us. And you
Yeah.
came to us with a FEM certification, which we've had quite a few FEM practitioners actually over the years. And as we continue, this is year 4 for FEM. So we've been running this program for quite some time now. We've had many dozens of practitioners go through. And we have had several practitioners that have one form of fertility awareness certification training background
Yes.
or another. So I'd be really just interested to hear a little bit about your transition, when you decided
Yeah.
that this is where you wanted to kind of focus, and also what your experience was coming out of the FEM program into FEM.
Yeah. So this almost feels like a bigger conversation about like my life's purpose, which, like I said, I'm kind of dramatic and emotional. But anyway,
We love it though, and we're here for
yeah.
it, by the way.
Thank you. Thank you. I would say I really enjoyed, just to start kind of at the top of the question, I really enjoyed the FEM training, but I found it to be very prescriptive in like this is the way that we do it. And from my experience, there's so much gray area when you look at women's charts. I wanted to know the why. I wanted to know, like, okay, I see that this chart looks this way. Now what? Because I'd been able to do that for myself relatively successfully, but it had taken me so long. Like, I wish I had detailed charts like I do now for my 25-year-old self, because I wasn't charting to the same degree of detail as I do now. And now I feel like my charts look pretty good. And I'm like really proud of my 15-day luteal phase. But it wasn't always like that. And I'm just so curious. Yeah, FEM, I felt like I wasn't getting enough. They have this medical management protocol where if you see there to be like 3 months of regular, so I can't remember the exact I was tested on this, but I can't remember it because I don't want this to be the case. But if you see 3 months of like irregular cycles in some capacity, you're supposed to refer to their medical management providers, which are like, MDs that have gone through their training, which it's great that there's people like that. But I also feel like I, as a practitioner, wanted to offer so much more than that. So that's why when I heard another one of these interviews with a girl who had also been through FEMM, and I was like, oh, wow, like I could do this too, which was great. And I am so glad that I made the jump, because I would say that at this point in my career, I'm still very much like kind of a baby in the entrepreneurial space. I actually played last night. I am a musician also. This is kind of the other job that I have. And I played at this entrepreneur event. There was this organization called like The Lonely Entrepreneur. They had an event in Nashville where I live. I was listening to this panel of speakers, and my husband and I have a duo that we played together and we performed for them. And I had no idea that this is what the event was. Like, we were just asked for this event. But anyway, it was really interesting because I heard all these people talking about entrepreneurship and like starting businesses. And it's like this, a support for people doing that. And I was like, wow, this is such a like kismet moment. Like I'm in this place now where I'm kind of trying to build my business, but it's very much been word of mouth up until this point. But I feel like FAMM has really been this like kick in the butt, in that, wow, you really are capable of doing this. Like, you don't need to go get another certification and like maybe go back to school, which I always kind of felt like maybe I should. Like, I think I struggled with feeling like I had enough credibility, but especially now in this program and just working with my practicum clients, I have felt so empowered, because I've realized that like, just because you know this information and I almost have blinders on where I'm like, this is such second nature to me now. Like I'm so aware of my body, and I'm so in tune with like taking care of it, making sure that my hormones are doing what they're supposed to do, and feeding it like I should at different phases. And I'm talking about my body like it's separate from me. I don't know how to do that. But I almost feel like how do other people not know this? But I've realized that other people don't know this information. And I think my whole mission with my business is like knowledge and nourishment. Like, that's what I keep telling myself, is like, that's what I want to provide to my clients. And I feel like this program has really made me see both that I can do it and that I do have a lot to offer, that it's so necessary. So yeah, but it was a long journey. I think I'm finally to the place where, like I said at the beginning, I have so many things that I am passionate about and that I just love and have invested so much time and energy in, probably at my own expense at different times of my life. I think this is the thing where I feel like, okay, I know that this is something that, have you heard of the whole like ikigai concept? Like,
I think so.
It's like this Japanese thing where it's like, true purpose and happiness in life comes from like building a life where you have something, I'm probably butchering this, but it's like something that you love and something that the world can benefit from and something that you can make money doing. And it doesn't necessarily have to be like one thing, but I think I've always felt like I didn't have a thing that was like all of that, like something that was good for the world and that could make me money and that I loved. And I feel like this is that and I'm really excited about building it, because yeah, I think I'm a very purpose-driven human, and I didn't realize how much this meant to me until now. So yeah.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you so much for sharing that with us.
Of course.
I know I can relate to what you're saying, because those were some of the thoughts that were going through my mind when I actually started the business aspect of it.
Yeah.
Because when I learned about fertility awareness, I mean, my initial few years of practice were at like a grassroots not-for-profit, and I'm older because I'm 42. I'm older than you.
You're not old,
but I'm older than you. And,
yeah.
And old enough that I went fully through high school with no cell phone at all.
Yeah.
And when I was learning about fertility awareness starting, there was no social media.
Mm-hmm.
So that's, however old that is, right?
Yeah.
And so when I was learning about it initially, I thought about a career at those early ages, when I was in my early 20s, but I couldn't
Mhm.
figure that out. I couldn't,
It
the
didn't
math
seem
didn't math.
possible.
Yeah. Cause I
Yeah.
was like, where would I get enough clients for me to actually survive? Because there was, like I
Yeah.
said, no social media. That was the thing.
Yeah.
Fast forward to when I started, Fertility Friday specifically, that was when I had my first son and I was like, oh, wow, podcasts are a thing. And right. And I was like, that means
Yeah.
anyone can start one. That means I
I
can
spend so
start
much
one.
time on podcasts. It's like hard for me to imagine that
Yeah.
it
But it
exists.
was like they were a new thing
Yeah. Yeah.
back then. And so I was kind of like, this is cool. Like I could do that.
Yeah.
So I can really resonate with that. And of course, with this work being how it is, and we kind of stress that idea of mentorship in this program.
Mhm.
And, I've obviously had a lot of time to reflect on all this stuff. One of the things I strive to do with FAMM is to create the opposite experience that so many of us have had as women, where
Yeah.
you're going into this so-called expert's office who we apparently believe knows everything at all
Yeah.
about everything. And we expect to throw our problems on this person's lap and expect them to have all of the
Mhm.
answers, even though they have a very specialized area that they focus on. But we
Yeah.
expect them to have all the answers. And then they tell us what to do, and we're supposed to do it, right? We're supposed to be good patients.
Right.
And then we're supposed to be fixed, and we never have to, like, with that, there's obviously pros and cons. Like, it would be great if you could do that,
Could do that. Yeah.
if it
I
actually
mean, even
worked.
now, I feel like I was talking to my husband about this yesterday. I still have this kind of a conditioning that like, that's what needs to happen. Like I need to know. It was actually after a call yesterday. I was like, man, I feel like I've done all the things and I'm still so frustrated that that my client's charts are still not good. And she still has a 7-day luteal phase. I was just, and I had to remind myself like, exactly what you're saying, that mentality that stems from how our experience with the medical system, like that's not what we're doing. Like we are empowering women, we are like helping them, kind of what you were saying yesterday, like get them to tell you the answer because likely they already probably know. So
Well,
yeah,
it's
I
a
think just
totally, like, there's pros and cons, right? Like,
right.
but I feel like it doesn't work that way. So the fact of the matter is that when you try to do that, so you don't realize it maybe, but when you expect someone else to be able to just have all the answers and you just let them tell you exactly what to do and you just do what they say, you are giving them the power.
Right.
A lot of women find that when they do that, they don't get the results that they want because even if they follow everything that they were told to do, it just doesn't lead them to what they want because ultimately
Yeah.
what they wanted. So our medical system in particular, our conventional medical system is designed for allopathic medicine. And that's the concept of
Right.
a pill for every ill. And so the system is designed, unfortunately, to then find the solution to your symptoms. So to symptom management, symptom reduction, symptom elimination, but not necessarily root cause, like identifying the root cause and addressing it. So we suppress the symptoms, but then that's the whole conversation we've been having for a
Yeah.
decade on Fertility Friday about the birth control pill and how it doesn't actually fix the root cause. It just suppresses the symptoms.
Mm-hmm.
And so from the perspective of FAMM, we're looking to be the opposite of that, where instead of, the woman totally just giving up all of her power, we're trying to put the power back in her hands. So by empowering her with information and education so that she understands how her body works. And then she has, no one's telling her you have to do this or you have to do that, but we're providing this framework of information and being informed by the cycle. So that's, of course, a huge piece of it. Even as a practitioner, it's very humbling, as I'm sure you found, because
Yeah.
you can come in with all your knowledge, but we really have to kind of go with that flow, like intentionally using that metaphor. But it's literally like that because her cycle informs how effective our recommendations are or what's really going to work. And you could have two totally different clients with very similar situations and you could suggest two very similar approaches. And one client, it might just see these amazing shifts immediately, but another client may not have that same experience. And that forces you to go with that flow and really dig
Yeah.
deep with this individual person and find out what's going to work for her. So it's like so that's from my perspective, my big picture, having been in the field for a long time, that's the goal, to shift the way that we look at women's health and
Yes.
focus more on what's actually going to work instead of whatever you
Right.
we're taught that's going to work for every single woman on earth in your degree
Right.
program.
Well, and it makes sense. It's like, the Western medical allopathic way is very much like this male driven kind of system. And it's like, okay, well, we're women and our bodies don't work that way. And yeah, what you were saying of like, you have to go with the flow and like see how her cycle adjusts and see what she wants to do. Like, it makes sense. It's a very kind of female way of doing it too. And it's like, of course we need to do it that way. Of course, this is what's going to work for women. But I think I've also noticed, oh, wow, my brain has been conditioned so to such a degree that I have a hard time with that, even though that should be my like natural inclination. Yeah, it's very interesting, but I'm seeing that it works better just over time doing it. So,
well, you know what that makes me think of? I did also want to just kind of dial back into your story, because you mentioned a couple of times that you worked on this issue that you were having. So I love that. And because I know you a little, I feel like, of course you did that. But when you decided to independently track your cycle and try to identify when you were feeling these symptoms and you figured out that it was cyclical, of course you did.
Yeah.
Because I loved hearing that. But then what you shared a couple of times was that, your journey, it wasn't this instant thing. It wasn't like you discovered that and then like instantly it was, solved.
Right.
Doing this independently on your own, trying to kind of find your own solutions and find your way through, it took, you said, almost about a decade or so
Yeah.
to really improve. So my question out of that, I mean, I would have a comment out of that, which is, I had a similar kind of experience with my own different challenges. Like when you're on your own without a mentor, without the information, and you're trying to figure this out and you're not, you're off the pill, you're like just trying to sort this out. It does take a long time when you have no information. So
Exactly.
ultimately, that's what FAMM is striving to be for women, so that it doesn't have to take 8 to 10 years for you to sort this out,
Yeah.
right?
Yes.
But on the other hand, there's a lot of learning that takes place. And I feel like as you continue to tap into just everything, your knowledge, your experience, as you continue to grow in your practice, I mean, there are lessons that you learned over that long period of time that can only be done that way, can only be done the hard way, right?
Oh, yeah.
And
I mean,
it'll help you to recognize too that even though we're giving our clients the quote shortcut, right, to these problems, it's still not going to be tomorrow that it's all solved.
Right.
It's still going to take them whatever duration of time that is for them. Again, the goal for it not to have to be a decade, but it's still going to take, as long as it takes for them to make those adjustments.
Yeah. I mean, the amount of like trial and error that I did in that time frame is insane to me. Like the amount of supplements and diet changes and like exercise things, and it's insane. But honestly, I learned so much in the process. Like I think I've read every women's health book that exists in literature. So that's great. Like I have so much more knowledge because of that, but also, yeah, the exact reason that I wanted to do this is because I don't want other people to have to do what I did. And, sometimes I look back and I'm like, man, when all this started happening, I had just finished grad school and I was trying to make it as a musician, and you're not making a lot of money doing that. So as much as I wish I could have like afforded functional testing or something at the time, it's like, well, sure, that would have been nice and maybe like cut off a few of the years that I spent doing this experiment on myself. But in that process, I learned so much, and I'm grateful for that. So I wish I had been a little quicker, but I think too, it's interesting. One of the biggest flips and something that I tend to overlook in my own life, when I started dating my husband, so many of my symptoms went away, like, especially with my skin, and like, just like my face was really swollen for a long time. And when I look back on that, I was like, wow, I think I just felt safe and supported in a time for the first time in my adult life. Like truly, it's like someone was on my team, and like, I was very independent and just trying to kind of make it for myself for so long. And like the impact that things like that can have in your life and on your physical health, I don't think I wouldn't have been able to experience that to the full extent that I did had I gone a different route of, oh, let's figure out if my, I don't know, like magnesium is too low or something. like yeah. So
Yeah, no, that's
experience is a lot. So.
yeah, and that's huge. I know you've mentioned that before in class too, and that's it shows us there's just not just one thing that is playing a role. You thought it would be easy. Teach them to chart their menstrual cycles, they said. Help them learn to use the menstrual cycle as a vital sign, they said. And then you saw the charts. You saw things that you didn't even know were possible, and you really don't know how to interpret them. Fortunately, I've created the perfect solution for you. I want to share with you our top resource for women's health professionals, how to interpret virtually any chart your client throws at you. This new resource breaks down complex chart interpretation into an easy step-by-step process. It will give you the tools you need to better support your clients. Head over to fertilityfriday.com/chart to snag your complimentary copy today. That's fertilityfriday.com/chart. Now let's go ahead and jump back into today's episode. So as we start wrapping up, I have a couple of questions.
Sure.
So the first question for anyone who's listening who has had a similar experience, whether it be with disordered eating or losing their period or just struggling with irregular cycles or, exercising a lot, not eating as much as they should, etc.
Yeah.
They're hearing you talk about how you went from basically like 3, and it was obviously over a long period of time, but you went from having this really significant challenge and not having a period at all for 3 full years and then recovering over this long period of time, but still having the profoundly low progesterone, which, now that we're, like I said, like knee deep in the FAMM rabbit hole, I feel like there's a pretty good explanation for that. You were likely still on that spectrum, even though you had made amazing progress, which resulted in the low progesterone, right? Like I'm sure lots of light bulbs have been going off.
Absolutely.
But, and then it's like, oh no, now I have a 15-day luteal. So if you were to break down, for us and this is, I know not enough, we could have spent the whole time talking about this, but the top 3 things that you feel made the biggest difference for you, with the understanding that the journey obviously wasn't just this rapid thing.
Right. Oh man, this is a hard one, Lisa. I think stress management, whatever that means to you, it could mean sleep, it could mean not over exercising. That I think is huge. And then I have made so many diet changes in the last couple of years. I was vegan for a really long time. And I think to some degree that helped certain things when I first started. But I got to a point where it was like, okay, we can't really go any further here because I was probably just, I think undernourished still. And what that really showed me was that it's not so much what you eat, but like the quality of the foods that you're eating. Because when I was in grad school, I was still eating animal products, but I was eating such low quality food because I was broke. And now I place a huge emphasis on that. Like when I do eat animal products, I try to get things from my farmer's market. I think that has made a huge difference in focusing on quality and not so much, I don't know, anything else. Yeah. So stress, food quality. I don't know. Like, this is going to sound so cheesy, but just like slowing down, looking at the sun, like things like that of just like, I think especially one of the other things probably that came with meeting my husband was spending more time just like being with other humans. I was so driven and just trying to accomplish what is a very challenging goal of like getting an orchestral job. It's very, very competitive. There aren't a lot of jobs and the audition process is like very, very stressful. And I really secluded and isolated myself during that time. And if there's other type A people like me listening, I think for me, like just really slowing down and taking the time to like, I don't know, just experience life more. Like I can get in these really crazy headspaces of just go, go, go. And I'm sure that contributes to stress levels as well. But like just really being truly in community with other people or another person. And like, for me, that has been huge of like allowing myself to process things verbally, because I'm definitely a verbal processor, and just, experience life alongside someone else. And I know that's not like an option for everybody in the present, but I think just like having people you can lean on, like having a support system. I haven't lived near my family since I was 18. Everybody's pretty independent and spread out. I also, like, my dad has brain cancer. And I think one thing that I look at him and see is like he was pretty isolated in his last few years of life, and I'm sure was very stressed for a lot of the years before that, just knowing him. And I think that those two things played a huge impact in just disease, quality of life. I think the body is so resilient, but you have to give it human interaction, love, affection. Those things do place, like, it sounds so cheesy, but like they're so important. And so, to me, probably those things.
I'm sorry to hear about your dad. I know you've mentioned it in class.
Yeah.
So we're all thinking about him.
Thank you. Thank you.
And I don't think it sounds cheesy at all. I think that you've hit on three really, really important aspects that there's studies that show, that isolation is actually really bad for your health. So not cheesy at all. Absolutely very, very important. And not always what we think,
Exactly.
because we're so focused on, this answer and the supplement, whatever.
Right.
But we also have to look at the quality of our lives, which is huge. So a couple last questions to wrap up. For someone who's thinking about jumping into FAMM, not really sure if this is the time. We do have our next class coming up shortly in the next few weeks. What would you want them to know?
You should just do it. I don't know. When I decided to sign up, it was super last minute. I might have been like your last person or something, but I didn't know if I should do it, because I kind of had this weird imposter syndrome of like, is this for me? Because like I said, I'm definitely kind of a baby in my business development. I remember I talked to a friend and she was just like, Grace, you care about this so much. Like, why would you not do it? It sounds like such an amazing opportunity. And what I've loved so much about this program is that it has been better than I anticipated. Every certification that I've done up until this point, and I've done many, it's been relatively hands-off. And I just love how much in-person contact there is, how we like actually get to know each other and just have a lot of hands-on interaction. That has been the most wonderful part about the program. Other things that I've done, it's very kind of screens off. If there is an in-person element, screens off, nobody talks. And I love that that's the case here. Like, you can ask as many questions as you want. Yeah, it's been probably the best part about this year for me. And I definitely did not have time for it. So if you think that's you'll figure it out. So yeah.
Oh, I love that so much. Because I always say, like, what woman over the age of 20 is just like sitting around with nothing to do? Like, come on.
Oh yeah.
Right?
I have like 3 jobs. This is not a good idea. I'm like regularly, I have my computer over here where my Slack messages are going off while I'm like on the call, like trying to focus and do the thing. Because I have a day job and like, we're not listening to this right now. But yeah, it's definitely you can invest a lot. I feel like I've invested a lot of my time and energy and just brain space towards this. And I think other people maybe don't do that. But for me, I felt like it is a big investment. And I mean, context is everything. But for me, it was a big investment. And I felt like if I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this 100%. I'm really glad that I did.
Well, thank you so much.
Yeah.
So last question, for anyone who wants to learn more about you and what you do and who happens to maybe be in a similar space to you, let us know all the places. How can people contact you?
Okay. So like I said, baby entrepreneur, but I'm launching, everything up until this point has been like word of mouth for me, which has been lovely because like all my clients have been in person and I've loved that. But I'm launching online. My website's built. Instagram's ready to go. We're launching in February, and my company's called OvaFreak, and www.ovafreak.com, and @OvaFreak on Instagram. So my personal Instagram, I don't know when this is coming out, but it's just Grace EH Parce, and you'll mostly probably see cello and handstand videos on there. Like my 2 other things that I love so much. So
Amazing. Well,
Yeah.
we will make sure to link to all the places when this episode
Awesome.
comes out.
Thank
Thank you
you.
so much, Grace, for being here. This has been just so much fun chatting with you. I'm really glad that we were able to get together.
This was great. This was great. I was so nervous, but this was so much fun.
Well, I will see you next week because we still have several weeks or months left in the program. So looking forward to seeing you a lot more.
Awesome. Thank you, Lisa.
Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed today's show, please share with a friend. You'll find the show notes page for today's episode over at fertilityfriday.com/566. I hope that you enjoyed today's episode with Grace. I always love these episodes because I get a chance to dig deeper into the stories. And I know I often say that, but it really is fascinating to me that I can be in class with many of our clients and practitioners for quite a while. And then every single time that we do these episodes, and I think it's just the nature of interviews where you ask these long-ended questions, so you do get a lot more of a background about their story because they're able to just kind of sit down and share in a totally different way than you do in a client session. So I just love how much additional information, just additional background that I get when I do these episodes. And we touched on so many important issues. We touched on the issue of PMDD, the challenges that Grace had with her cycle to the point that her doctors were wanting to diagnose her with bipolar disorder. But what was lacking was that additional knowledge about how this could be related to the menstrual cycle and potentially related to her long-standing habit of undernourishing herself. And it wasn't an easy process by any means. It was also not a quick process, as Grace described, but certainly she did, through trial and error, significantly improve her cycles, her symptoms, and she did it without heavy medication from the psychiatric establishment. So it is really a test to that. It doesn't mean that everyone's going to have the same experience, and it doesn't mean that there's never a need for stronger medication. But I do think that it really poses the question of, when we have somebody who's experiencing some of these distressful symptoms or distressing symptoms, then why are we not looking at potentially the cycle and the hormonal approach, especially in women, first, and also looking at their foundational factors, having that understanding that if you have somebody who's not even having a menstrual cycle or having a very irregular, disrupted menstrual cycle due to undernutrition, then that could be contributing to these emotional factors. This is a known thing because we know that PMDD, the cyclical emotional disturbances around the menstrual cycle, are heavily related to an imbalance of progesterone and estrogen production. So much great information in today's episode. And again, very inspiring that Grace's experiences led her to actually switch careers and move into a completely different direction so that she can work towards helping other women not have to experience the same thing. So, huge thank you again to Grace and all the other participants of the FAMM Practitioner series for sharing their stories and experiences. I know it's very inspiring. And I hear from our practitioners all the time that these are some of their favorite episodes. So of course, really appreciate that. This is the last call. So if you're waiting till the very end, if you're waiting for like the absolute last minute to join us in our cohort, if you're listening in real time, we are starting in March of 2025. This is the last call. So we are going to be starting next week. And so if you're wanting to join us, you can find details over at fertilityfriday.com/FAMMLIVE. And you can reach out to us if you have any questions. If you're wanting additional details, just let us know. If you are listening in the future, you can still head over to that page to see what we have going on, or you could head over to fertilityfriday.com/FAMMWL. So FAMWL for waiting list, and jump on the waiting list to be notified first when we open registration next time. So with that said, I hope you have a wonderful weekend whenever you're tuning into the show. And of course, as always, until next time, be well and happy charting. And that's a wrap. If you're loving the Fertility Friday podcast, then I know you'll love our Fertility Awareness Mastery Mentorship Program. It's a 9-month immersive experience that will completely transform the way you work with clients, allowing you to not only teach fertility awareness, but to use the menstrual cycle as a vital sign and diagnostic tool in your women's health practice. Our next class starts on the 26th of March, so there's still time to reserve your spot. There's no other program like this offered anywhere. Transform your practice in 9 months. Head over to fertilityfriday.com/FAMMLive to apply now. That's fertilityfriday.com/FAMMLIVE. Join us in FAMM. This is your year, and we can't wait to have you. Again, that's fertilityfriday.com/FAMMLIVE.